Alright, in this video we're going to be looking at lessons the 5.7 and 5.9 quiz. Alright, so looking at this first one, so these are all going to be trig equations that we're going to be solving. And so for this first one, what we're going to be doing is we want to, let me just rewrite this. We're going to have 3.41 equals 2 plus tangent of theta. Alright, my first step is to get the tangent of theta all by itself. So I'm going to subtract 2 from both sides. When I do that, I get 1.41 equals tan theta. So to figure out what theta is, I'm going to take the inverse tangent of both sides. I want to make sure that for this one, since the question asks us to find all the values between 0 and 2 pi, that indicates that your answer, your calculator should be in radians. Okay, so your calculator should be in radians for this. And so if I take the inverse tangent of 1.41, we get 0.9539. And it says the nearest one, we're going to round to the nearest hundred, so we'll just leave that at 0.95. Alright, well we need to find all the values between 0 and 2 pi. Now remember, for the tangent function, it's a little different than the sine and cosine function, because for the tangent function, every value repeats itself every pi radians. So to find the other value, what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to add pi to 0.95. So when I do that, I get 4.095, or we can just say 4.1. So our two values between 0 and 2 pi would be 0.95 and 4.1. Alright, so this has a little bit of 5.7 in it with the, 5.9 in it with a little bit of the secant, cosecant, and cotangent functions, but it also has sine, cosine, and tangent. So it's a combination of some of the things we did earlier in the chapter and some of the more recent stuff. Alright, so to start out with, we're working with A, so the sine of A would be the opposite over the hypotenuse. The opposite side would be 12. The hypotenuse would be 13. Now, that can't be reduced. If it could be reduced, I'd want to reduce it, but 12 13s can't be reduced. Cosine of A would be the adjacent leg over the hypotenuse, so we'd have 5 over 13, and that can't be reduced either. And the tangent of A would be opposite over adjacent leg, so it would be 12 divided by 5. And that can't be reduced. So none of those can be reduced there. Now, the cosecant, remember, is the reciprocal of the sine function. The cosecant is the reciprocal of the sine function. So the sine function is 12 13ths, so it's going to be 13 twelfths. And the secant is reciprocal of the cosine function, so that would be 13 fifths. The cotangent is reciprocal of the tangent function, so in this case that would be 5 twelfths. So that's how you would do this one. Alright, looking at number 3 here. So this is another cotangent question. So it asks for the cotangent of 60 degrees. Okay, so now remember, the cotangent is the tangent is sine over cosine. So the cotangent is the reciprocal of that, so it would be cosine over sine. Remember, on our unit circle, the cosine of 60 is 1/2, and the sine of 60 is square root of 3 over 2. So now I just need to simplify this. So if I multiply the top and bottom, the denominator, or by the reciprocal of the denominators, which would be 2 over the square root of 3. So these would cancel out, these would cancel out. In the numerator, these would cancel out. Now in the numerator, then I'm left with 1 over the square root of 3. Well, if you notice, none of those are listed. 1 over the square root of 3 is not the same as just a square root of 3. So to simplify this, remember, you have to rationalize the denominator. We need to get rid of the square root from the denominator. So when we do that, we'll multiply the top and bottom by what's square root of what's in the denominator. So in the numerator, we'd have square root of 3. In the denominator, we have square root of 3 times square root of 3, which is just 3. So now I can see that that is the very last option. That one there. Alright, so for this one, what we're going to do is we're going to solve this for sine. So we want to get the sine of theta by itself. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to divide both sides by -6. When I do that, I get sine of theta equals 0.5. So to get our answer, to figure out what one of the values for sine would be, we're going to take the inverse sine of 0.5. Now again, it's important that you make sure that your calculator is in radian mode and not in degree mode. But when we do that, and around the nearest hundredths, we get 0.52. Now remember, to find the other value for the sine function, what I'm going to do is I'm going to subtract that from pi. And the reason for that, remember the sine function looks like this. And if this is at 1 and this is negative 1, 0.5 would be right here. Okay? Or the y value would be 0.5 is right there. So we want to figure out what values for theta would give us 0.5. So I want to figure out these two values. Now we just found one of those values is 0.52. So I need to figure out what this value is. So that means that, again, this distance would be 0.52, so that means this distance from pi would also be 0.52. So to figure out what that value would be, we would take pi minus 0.52. When you do that, we get 2.62 as our answer. So that would be our other value between 0 and 2 pi. I want to make sure we put these in the right order, so we'll put 0.52 in first and 2.62 second. So just remember, for the sine function, to find that other value, if it's a positive value, which is a lot easier if it is, so more than likely it will be since this is your first time seeing this, we just subtract that value from pi. Alright, well let's look to see what if it's a cosine function for this last problem. So what I'm going to do first is, there's two steps we have to do to get cosine by itself. The first step would be to add 1 to both sides. And when I do that, let's see, so I have 4 times the cosine of theta. When I add 1 to negative 0.72, I get 0.28. And now I'm going to take, and to solve for cosine of theta, I'm going to divide each side by 4, so that gives me 0.07. So to find what theta is, this time we're going to do the inverse cosine of 0.07. And we get 1.50. So 1.5 would be our value for theta. Now for this, I'm going to subtract this from 2 pi to find my other value. And the reason why, let me show you again. Alright, so if this is 1 and negative 1, now we had cosine of theta was 0.07. So we'll just say this is 0.07. So again, there's two values where to find theta that we're looking for. We're trying to find those two values for theta. So this distance from here to here is 1.5. So when the cosine, or when we take the cosine of 1.5, we get the value of 0.07. So I want to figure out what this value would be. And so this distance would be the same distance of 1.5. So we're going to take 2 pi minus 1.5 to get that other value. And when you do that, we get 4.78. So those would be our two values of theta. So one starting with 1.5, and the second one being 4.78. So there you have it. So that is how you do those problems on this quiz. So hopefully that answers any questions that you might have had. Just like usual, if you still have some questions, please make sure you get those answered before we take that test.